What's happening, everybody? This is Jim from JCRC, doing a quick and informational video or informative video for one of my viewers named Axial Driver. He was asking me about my suspension articulation and how I achieved all of that. So this video is specifically for him. Everybody else, if you don't want to watch it, you don't have to watch it. If you know somebody with a trail finder too, then feel free to share the video with them. And as always, a like click is much appreciated. Feel free to subscribe, feel free to share with your friends, all that good stuff. So let's get down to it. We'll get right down into the nitty gritty. First off, I had to make my own custom body mounts. The reason I made the body mounts, two reasons. One, I put a bench seat in it, and my speed controller, the bench seat is sitting on top of the speed controller, so I needed the extra lift for that. I also needed the extra lift to clear the tires inside the fender with the articulation without cutting the fenders. Otherwise, you're going to have to cut your fenders. If you're going to try to use the stock body mounts, you'll have to cut the fenders to be able to get the articulation in there. There's good parts and bad parts about having a body lift. Pro, you're not losing or you don't have to trim your fenders. Bad part about it, or the con part about it, is that it's extremely, or a little bit more top heavy, because you're getting your body farther up into the air, so you're raising all this weight farther up. The body mounts are plastic from a pond filter. It's roughly a 1/16 of an inch thick, 3.5 inches long, 1 1/4 inches high, and it's 3/4 of an inch from bolt hole to bolt hole. From center to center, it's 3/4 of an inch. And I have 2 screws going into the stock body mount locations and 2 screws coming back out. This eliminates having to put screws in here. It eliminates having to use the pins in the bed. It's quick and easy. You just pull apart the body like that on either side and lift it off. And voila, piece of cake. Off comes the body. You can see the pieces of plastic. They look pretty rough and crude. You can see up on top where the screws are coming back through right here, coming back out to the outside. And I just pull the body over and slip these into the holes, and that's where it sits. Alright, let's get down to the suspension here. Number one, I'm using Rc4wd Drive 100mm shocks. These are just the standard shocks, but they're 100mm. And I'm using Glenda shock hoops. And my shocks are mounted. There's 2 screw holes in the shock hoops. There's a lower hole and an upper hole. I have them in the upper hole. That seemed to be the best location for them. For spring perches on the back, I'm using the stock spring perches on the back of the springs. And I'm using Rc4wd Drive Teraflex revolvers on the front of the springs. For the springs, I'm using Rc4wd Drive Red Super Soft Leaf springs. And I'm just using the main spring and the smallest spring underneath it. So I'm not using the middle spring, I'm just using the big main spring and then the smallest leaf spring. Underneath the leaf springs, we can get this camera to focus on it, you can see 2 small rubber O-rings. Those are sitting underneath the leaf springs and on top of the lift blocks. There's also O-rings on the back of the axle. If you're not using lift blocks, then the leaf springs sit on top of the axle versus on top of the lift block. But with the 100mm shocks, to get the right kind of articulation, you will need these lift blocks underneath here. And here is the lift block kit. This is a lift kit from Rc4wd Drive. I had ordered 2 of these. I only used 1 of them. So this is just sitting off to the side. Try to get the focus in on here. Here's the part number Z-S0834. Z-S0834. And that is for the lift blocks. And I'm using the 2 biggest blocks, or the largest blocks out of this kit, which is this one right here that my thumb is sitting by, and this one over here. And I needed that to get the proper axle droop. And this is the droop, how far your axle sags. Without that, you're just not going to, your shocks, you're not going to get the right kind of travel out of it. It'll be pointless putting on 100mm shocks if you don't get the correct kind of droop out of it. So the shock needs to be able to drop to its full length, and it needs to be able to compress to its full length as well. So that's full droop, and then full compression. And for the shocks, they have internal springs. I recommend getting an Rc4wd Drive spring kit for the 100mm shocks. And here is the number on the spring kit, Z-S1351, S1351. And then it comes with 4 packets of springs, 4 packets of 4, varying in different stiffness and length or whatever. Depending on what springs you use, if you use too stiff of a spring, they end up being longer springs. And with a longer spring on an internal spring shock tower or internal spring shock, means that you don't get as much compression out of it. Like it'll bottom out at like here instead of up all the way. So the softer the springs you use, the more travel that you're going to get out of it. So you have to be careful on what springs that you're using on the inside of it. Obviously, you're going to need different rates of stiffness in the springs, depending on how much weight you actually have inside your truck. Alright, back down to the front axle here. So with installing this lift block here on the front axle, you're going to need longer screws. I use 26mm screws on the front axle. I also run my screws from the bottom up. I think Rc4wd Drive in the instruction manual tells you to run them from the top down. I don't advise on that. I run them from the bottom up just so I have more clearance on the bottom of the axle. They probably have you do that so you're not damaging the head of the screw, but ultimately it really doesn't matter, because even if it does get damaged, you can still back the screw out from up top. You can still like wrap a rag around this and put a pair of pliers on there and start spinning it down from the top down versus the bottom down. And then, like I said, there's these O-rings that fit in between the springs and the nut or whatever at the top. That gives you just a little bit more flex and articulation out of it. And when you're tightening these down, every once in a while you're tightening these down, just push down on the spring. I don't know if you can see it there, but there is just a little bit of a gap in between that nut and the spring. You don't want that O-ring compressed. You want it to be able to flex. So you need just a pinch of gap. So every once in a while you're tightening it down, just keep pushing down on the spring until you have just a little hair of gap there in between the two. And that's going to aid in your articulation. Now, also on the front, here's another good view of it. You can see the screws on the bottom. That's why I put them on the bottom, so you get more clearance and you don't have to worry about anything snagging or getting a hold of your screws and stopping you. It's bad enough with the ground clearance that you have, so you don't need to have any added pain to that. So that's that. Lift blocks there, 26mm screws, blah blah blah. The steering connecting arm here, going to the knuckle. Number one, this main drag link here, I have mounted underneath the steering knuckle arm. I think Rc4wd Drive wants you to put it on top. I have it mounted underneath. There's a 26mm screw right here going from top to bottom, and I believe this is a 3mm spacer that I had to add to the steering connecting rod, and that is giving me more axle droop. Like even if you put these shocks on there and you put the lift blocks on there and you do everything else and you're not getting the axle droop, it's because of this. Your steering arm or linkage is going to limit to how far your axle can actually drop, so you're going to need to put that spacer in there to get the correct kind of droop in order to get the right kind of articulation out of it. As well as mounting your servo underneath the main cross member there. In the instructions, they want your servo bolted in from the top down. I bolted mine in from the bottom up. That way it drops this whole pitman arm down lower, giving you that more, that extra room for articulation. Now that gets really close. That gets really close to the motor. It almost looks like it touches, but it doesn't. Depending on whether your motor's clocked or not. Mine is clocked, so that was a little bit of a worry. But it's not touching the motor. There is a little bit of clearance in between there. You can fit a couple pieces of paper in between there. If it was hitting, you would see all kinds of scratches on the bottom of the motor. So it's really close, but it's not hitting the motor. So once again, you need to mount your servo from up underneath, as well as putting this 3mm spacer and 26mm screw on here, in order to get that kind of articulation out of it. There is from the top down. You can see where I have lock nuts on the back half of the servo. I've got no lock nuts on the back half of this side just because I couldn't fit them in there. There's no way I could fit them in there. So those are just threaded through, because that cross member is threaded, so you can just thread it right on through, put a little bit of Loctite on there, some blue Loctite, and that'll keep all that held in check for you. My motor is clocked. There's plenty of videos on how to clock a motor. I got the main idea from Dave Jr. off of RC Sparks, and I referred to RC Every Day and a couple other RC channels, you know, and to you know, figure out exactly how that was done, and then did that. So if you want to clock your motor, there's plenty of videos out there on how to do all that nonsense. You do have to cut a cross member right here. You have to leave a chunk of that cross member on there because this Glenda 2 shock hoop screws into that cross member, or into that piece. So you got to leave a small piece on there, so you have something to screw into. And also on the front, there's another servo tab that hangs out this way. You need to cut that off, and you need to grind away a little bit of material in here, so the back half of this motor, the back half of this housing will clear that cross member. But that really has nothing to do with suspension travel. Mainly axial driver, you're going to want to worry about that servo. And like I said, you're going to want to mount that in from underneath and then bolt it down. And there's another view of the front, just so you have an idea of what you're looking at. This main connecting arm gets bolted down underneath these steering knuckles. And like I said, mount your servo from underneath and put a 3mm spacer on that and a 26mm bolt on this end of the steering knuckle, just so you get the proper axle droop, which will, you know, like I said, it equates to your articulation. And that connecting arm should run in between the leaf spring and the motor, just like that. Alright, moving on to the back. Well, I guess, you know, before we move on to the back, let's talk about the drive shafts. I'm using steel Punisher drive shafts from Rc4wd Drive. If you're using a long wheelbase truck, then the drive shaft length is probably going to be different than what it is on my truck. So I can't guarantee anything on the actual drive shaft length. For the front drive shaft, I believe that is the I ordered two of them at the same time initially, and they were both this size from, you know, front and back. The front one doesn't get much movement out of it, so it's okay as it is. There's, you know, you don't have to worry about any separation between the, you know, drive shaft and the slip joint here. All that pretty much stays the same. But my rear drive shaft, I had to get a longer drive shaft than what was on it. I believe, like I said before, the front and rear ones were both the same length. I had to get a longer one on the back, mainly because of these Z boxes that are on my back springs. The drive shaft was coming undone at the slip joint, so I had to get a longer drive shaft, and I can't exactly recall how long that drive shaft is. I want to say it is the 90 to 120 millimeter shaft, but it might be longer. It might be the 120 to 145 millimeter shaft. I'm not too sure on that. I kind of forgot because I had ordered a couple of these things, so, and I already threw away the paperwork, so like I said, I'm not too sure on that. But you might need a longer drive shaft in the back once you're all said and done. Alright, so on the back here, we've got the stock spring perches that connect to the frame, and then once again another set of Rc4wd Drive Teraflex revolver shackles on the back. And then I have Teraflex Z boxes. These are Z boxes on the back half here. And those Z boxes, what they are doing is they're giving the axle more droop. You can see it right there, and then it gives it just a little bit more droop because it's able to drop down. That essentially is doing the same thing as those little lift blocks on the front axle. I had to add the lift blocks on the front axle in order to give it enough droop on the axle to get full travel out of that shock. So like I said, the Z boxes on the back are kind of balancing out that lift block on the front, and there is no lift blocks on the back. I have the screws running from the bottom up again. Once again, I'm only running 2 springs per leaf spring pack, just like on the front. I'm using the main large leaf spring and the smallest leaf spring in the pack. And you can see on here that there is O-rings between the leaf springs and the axle. And once again, if I can get the camera to focus in on it, once again, make sure to push down on this, and you want just a fuzzy of gap, just a little bit of gap there in between the the spring and the nut here on the back half. And I don't know why this camera is not focusing. Like I said, I'm trying to keep this, I'm looking at my time too, I'm at 15 minutes. So yeah, once again, as you're tightening down this nut, keep pushing down on that spring and make sure that there's just a pinch of gap there. You know, enough for like a piece of paper or something to fit in between it. And like I said, you want to keep those, you don't want to compress those O-rings, you need them flexible, which aids in your articulation from side to side. These shock hoops, ignore these shock hoops. These are the stock shock hoops off the front of the truck. I just moved them to the back here. I did have these shocks hooked up to it, but the problem is that the mount is up too high, so the whole shock is lifted up, which means the truck rides lower and you don't get the suspension droop out of it. It just doesn't get enough droop out of it, and it doesn't get enough compression out of it. So it's a waste of time. The only reason these are here are just to give more support for these plastic pieces that I have, stuck in the back. Like I said, the plastic pieces are just hiding the gap from, from having the body lift on there, or else you'd see this huge gap in between the frame. And these body posts, they're not really being used. I have them trimmed down. They do stick through the bed, but they're sitting flush with the bed, so they're not actually sticking through the bed. They're just here for, moral support, I guess. They're just there for a little extra support. So yeah, that's the full setup on the back, and I have the 100mm shocks put into the stock locations on the back, and it's the furthest out locations, the location that's closest to the frame on either side, and that worked out best for full droop and full compression on the rear axle. Like I said, when it's hanging up in the air like this with no tires on it, it doesn't look like it has all that much articulation, but it does. Once you put the tires on there, it has crazy amounts of articulation for a trail finder. So once again, little recap on the back. We've got Teraflex revolvers from Rc4wd Drive on the back. Don't remember the part numbers. If you go on Rc4wd Drive's website, they're easy to find. Teraflex Z-boxes on the front of the back axle. Like I said, that allows you to have a little bit more axle droop. You can see how the Z-box actually works there with the spring. It just kind of, like I said, gives you just a little bit more travel. Your stock spring location would be up here, so this just allows this to drop down farther. And the revolvers on the back allow your leaf springs to twist. When you start arcing them out like that, it allows them to twist without actually twisting the leaf spring, because the center point right here actually pivots from left to right. So you kind of need those on there to get some extra twist out of it without having to worry about damaging your springs. And through the magic of video, tires are back on it. There's a quick shot of underneath the truck. I've made some homemade mounts here, and I've got a little 2-cell LiPo battery here that runs my lights only, plastic dipped. Our receiver is sitting inside the receiver box. I have servo extensions coming off of all my wires, plastic dipped the entire receiver, and then had to drill a hole through the top of the box to let all these wires come out. And it basically sits level with the top of here, which is the bottom of the truck. Battery has been plastic dipped. Underneath the speed controller is my winch controller. Down here, that has been plastic dipped, and that's zip tied to the top of the speed controller. I had to drill a couple holes in the bottom plate there, the chassis plate, to get the zip ties through. Clock motor, servo mounted underneath the main cross member. Cross member is cut to clock the motor down in. And then there it is, all put back together. I can't get a good grip on it. And then, yeah, once again, like I said, after you're done, it doesn't look like much, but that's a lot. That's 4 stock trail finder tires that I'm sitting on. It should give you roughly 5.5 inches, or 5 1/4 to 5.5 inches of travel. Well, I shouldn't say travel. Clearance height, 5.5 inches of clearance height. And that's about, the max that you're going to get with this particular setup. And the same thing on the back. And it will actually compress just a pinch more than that, but not much more than that. The back might actually flex just a pinch more than the front, but that's mainly it. Enough room to clear 4 stock tires. I'm not too sure if a 4-link setup or a 3-link setup or anything like that gives you any more. I know that I cannot run the 3-link setup on the front of the truck, just because my motor is clocked. That 3-link suspension setup that goes on the front attaches to the top of the axle, and with my motor being rotated down into the chassis, it just won't work. You will actually get less articulation, just because of that bracket that's on top of the axle for the 3-link will hit the bottom of the motor. So if you have a clock motor, you probably will not be able to run that 3-link setup. Like I said, I stuck with leaf springs. I wanted to keep it traditional. So like I said, you might be able to get more flex out of it with a different setup, but this is what I've got so far, and I hope it's I've been pretty happy with it so far with this setup, and that's kind of what it looks like from the other angle. There's just enough clearance here with those homemade body mounts to clear the back tire. Every once in a while it'll rub a little bit, but it's very marginal. And same with the front. Every once in a while the tire will rub a little bit on the fender, but that's really nothing. So that's it. I hope you guys appreciate the video. Axial driver, I hope this was helpful for you there, brother. Any more questions, yeah, feel free to check and or leave a message or whatever, and I'll get back with you on that as soon as I can. Like I said, I don't know if I said anything at the beginning, but I did actually leave a comment for you in another video with a full written out description on what all you need and how to go about doing it. So like I said, you might want to refer back to that other video and write all that stuff down. That way you'll have a written down list of what you need, so you don't have to keep coming back and referring to a video. Not trying to be mean or anything like that. Don't misunderstand me, guy. I'm just trying to be as cool as I can with this and trying to help you out as best as I can with it. But like I said, the little list that I wrote down for you is like a full detailed list or whatever. So if you copy that down, you'll have you'll be able to have the instructions in front of you versus referring back to a video over and over again. So yeah, the video is definitely, hopefully the video is helpful for you, but I'm sure the written instructions will probably be more helpful for you. Either way, like I said, my man, I hope this helps you out, and I'm very much appreciated for you watching my videos and everything else. And yeah, once again, feel free anytime you have any questions, leave a comment, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can on any of that stuff. So thanks again, everybody. Click like and subscribe, share with your friends, and you all have a great day. Axial driver, I wish you the best of luck, my man, and thanks for watching, brother.